forgotten how cold the weather is. And my car, I bought it last fall, so I haven't had it, all that long. And today, it's only a 2007, so it's an old car. But it has some of those features that I hadn't ever had before. And so when I got in there today, when I turn it on, it comes up on that other screen. It's a very small screen, about 3 inches, 4 maybe, and it has my name, and then it tells me the temperature. And then it tells me if I need to change the oil. And in fact, I changed the oil, and I don't know how to change the message. So every time I turn on my car, it tells me to change the oil. Maybe I need that reminder. But anyway, today Kim said possibility of ice. So my brother-in-law, he bought a new car a few years ago, and he said, now I have 3 things that are smarter than I am: my phone and my computer and my car. So in case you don't know it, according to my car information, there's a possibility of ice. So we're looking at an introduction to the New Testament, and in the process we're looking at different kinds of Bibles, and we talked about that, and we talked about different kinds of helps that you get when you when you read the Bible. And tonight I want to carry that forward a little bit and add some things to it. Now, I've been fascinated, particularly since I started this study earlier last year. I've been fascinated with the idea of what can we do to encourage people who come to church to read the Bible and know the Bible. And as I mentioned many times, it really concerns me that people seem not to know very much about the Bible. In the last 2 weeks, I've emphasized that there were times in history when individuals and families did not have a copy of the Bible. It's hard for us to imagine it. I've never known a time when I didn't have a Bible, except when I was a child. And even then, there was a Bible in my house. And in Sunday school, I would have a Bible. But, and then there were times throughout history, as we mentioned, in which either the Catholic Church or the government, particularly the British government, forbade people from owning a Bible or reading a Bible. Now, we just can't imagine that in our time. But we do have other issues. Today in Texas, the school children go to public school. The state legislature passed a law that every classroom must post the 10 Commandments in the classroom. And of course that means that more or less children are required, if not to read them, at least required to be aware that posting is there. Not only that, but the legislature in their choice decided what version of the 10 Commandments they will put there. There are really 3 versions of the 10 Commandments. When all that started a long time ago, I found myself saying, okay, if you men and women are so smart that you think we ought to put the 10 Commandments in the classroom, tell me where to find them in the Bible. And I guess that almost all the legislators, off the top of their heads at least, without help, could not find the 10 Commandments in the Bible. Of course, you know where they are, don't you? They're in 2 places. But you take both lists, they're not quite the same. Of course, ultimately they're the same, but wording is a little different. same. But there are three ways to count. The Ten Commandments are not named and not counted 10 in the Bible. You know, everybody assumes that when Moses received the 10 Commandments from God, that God said, now Moses, write down these 10 lists, number one. But he didn't do it that way. The Jewish people have one way of counting, and the Roman Catholic Church has one official way of counting, and then free church, people in the free church tradition, as we are, and Protestants, have another way. Ultimately, it doesn't make all that much difference, but I'm certainly comfortable with what I've always thought of as the Protestant and free church list. My point is that it is not the state's role to teach the Bible. Matter of fact, in my view, it is illegal for them to teach the Bible. I'm a Baptist, and the number one issue for Baptists is soul freedom. No one can tell an individual what to believe. Every person has the capacity and the right to believe for himself or herself. If you don't believe that, you're not a Baptist. But the sad thing is that regardless of where you are in this issue of the separation of church and state, ultimately it is every person's responsibility to learn the Bible. Now, the pastor does his part. Every week after week, your pastor and others like him have read the Bible and interpreted the Bible and mentioned ways that the persons can apply the Bible. And of course, in your church, you've through the years provided Sunday school literature and other literature in your church. The deacons lead each Sunday in the public reading of a portion of the Bible. And yet, in spite of all of that, we have people who just simply don't know much about the Bible. Well, you're working on that, and I hope to see the day when everybody you know, your family members, your friends, your neighbors, people who are acquainted with you, and certainly people who come to our church, just get it on their heart to try to know something specific about the Bible. To me, it's one of the most fascinating studies. And I guess there was a time in my life when I thought that I would know enough about the Bible that I could just sit back and enjoy what I knew. But I find that I keep studying every day. And just the other day I was on the phone with a lady who was going to teach Sunday school next Sunday. And I normally she doesn't teach her class, but she had been asked to teach. And in the meantime, she had looked for some things, and she had run across a Bible study on Isaiah. Her lesson is going to be on Ezra and Nehemiah. But for some reason, she had been involved in this study on Isaiah, and the lady who was teaching it said something significant about chapter 53. And if those of you remember, chapter 53 is late in the period of Isaiah. It actually refers to events that happened after the life of Isaiah. But anyway, when she mentioned that, I thought to myself, well, I need to go back and review that because right now I can't put that in place. So the Bible is such a fascinating study. Let me start with a story, and then I'll try not to get off the subject anymore. I've told you often about my twin sister who lives in Marietta, Georgia, and she's coming to visit us this week. I hope that you'll be able to meet her. But I was telling her the other day about something that happened to us when we were children. Now, she remembers it a little differently, so I may be wrong, but I hate to tell her, she also may be wrong, but we were 8 years old. And for the only time, as I said, we were 8 years old, and my little sister was younger, and my brother was younger. And our family moved in the spring. It must have been about March. We moved out out to the outskirts of Houston. And my daddy didn't have a car. And about that time, he started working for the Houston Fire Department, so he had to ride the bus every day back and forth to work. And it was quite a ways. We thought it was way out in the country. Now, the airport is even further out than that, so it wasn't very far, but we thought it was. Well, I don't remember if it was the first Sunday or the second Sunday, but right after we moved, my mother took all of us, but my father was working, but my mother took us to church. And she knew that there was a Baptist church near us, and I believe the name was North Central Baptist Church. It's on Tidwell Road in Houston. And we rode the bus, and then walked. We had to walk about a block or two to catch the bus, and then we had to walk a couple of blocks when we got off the bus. But we went to this church, and of course she got there, and people told her where to go. So she took us to the primary department. The primary department was ages 6, 7, and 8. And then she left us, and then she took the other children to their places. Well, in those days, they had a typical Sunday school where the children all met in one big room and then broke up into classes in smaller groups. You all of you have done that. And so I was sitting there, my sister and I, about halfway back, and the teacher reminded everybody that they had been studying, memorizing the 23rd Psalm. Now, my sister remembers it as the 100th Psalm. But I think it was the 23rd Psalm. And so, I don't know how long they've been working on that, but a few weeks. And she said, now boys and girls, every one of you who can quote the 23rd Psalm, come up here to the front. Well, I looked at Maureen, and she looked at me. Well, we knew that. And so we walked up to the front, and we stood there in a line with about 5 or 6 of the children. And one by one, each child quoted the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not. And then we sat down, and of course people were very pleased. But I remember 2 things that struck me that day, and I remembered it all these years, and it's been all these years. The first was, why were there only 6 children standing up there when you had about 30 in the room? Pretty good sized little country church. And I never will forget, I thought myself, why are there just a few of us here? And when it came my turn, I just, and as I remember, all 4 or 5, or 5 or 6 of us, quoted it correctly. But anyway, then we had the Sunday school, and then my mother came to pick us up, and the lady that was in charge, the director of the department, met her, and she said, "Oh, Miss Smith, your children are so wonderful." She said, "Why, they're so smart." She said, "Well, they were able to quote the 23rd Psalm." And Mother was pleased with that report, and she was very proud of us, and she said something, I don't remember exactly, but I'm sure she was proud of us. But we started back, and either before we got to the worship service or maybe after church, I remember saying, "Mother, doesn't everybody know the 23rd Psalm?" And of course she had to report to me that not everybody knew it. Well, folks, how little is acceptable? Or put it another way, for those of you who've been in church for all these years, I'm not going to ask how many, how much of the Bible should you know? I don't mean memorize, I mean facts. How many people, how many events, how many references, you see? When I graduated from high school, I could list all the books of the Bible. Memorize Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, on and on, the whole 39, all the 27 books of the New Testament. I knew all the types of literature in the Old Testament, the 5 kinds of literature in the New Testament. I knew all the letters of Paul. I knew the difference between the letters of Paul and the general letters. And I knew the names of hundreds, dozens of people in the Bible. And I had a pretty good idea of the chronological order of events in the Bible. And I think those are rather, in my view, they're almost minimum things that we Christians and we Baptists who say we love the Bible ought to know. See? And so the 2 things that you and I can do. One is we can do as well as we can with genuine interest and joy knowing about the Bible. Secondly, we can inspire others. So that's kind of where I am. Now let's look here at some material that I hope will be helpful, and I'll have to look up the page. Let's go to 62, page 62. Helpful internet resources for Bible study. Now, I use this, I bring this up not as much for your benefit as personally, but for your benefit as a person who's influential. You know, today in the internet and the telephone, the way the telephone works, we have something that you and I didn't have when we were children. When I was a child and a teenager and a young adult and a young pastor, I never heard, first of all, of cell phones, but I never heard, and the internet, but I never heard of the term a social influencer. But now I understand that there are people who have internet sites or they have accounts on the different telephone apps, and I sort of don't know them all, but Twitter and of course your church is on Facebook and your church is on YouTube, but you can, on the phone they have, it was TikTok, which I've never seen or used, and probably never will, but at least it's out there, and in my understanding it's very influential. I have an article on my desk, and I keep looking at it wondering how I missed the boat. It's an article by a business writer for the San Antonio Express News, about 6 months old, and he's telling about this little girl who lives up in the hill country, who is 14 years old, and she has an account on one of these social media outlets. I don't know if it's TikTok or what it is, and she dresses up and she dances against certain kinds of music, and for like a minute at a time, and then she has like 4 million followers. So guess what? She sells advertising through her site. And so she has an income, and this was 6 months ago, of $8,000 a month. A month. $8,000 a month. With this little act, and she doesn't even talk, evidently. I don't know if she has commentary or not, but she just acts, dances and plays the music, and she has figured out what kind of music, and the young people, and I guess adults too, recognize the music, and so all these people are just clamoring to let her advertise for them, and then every time somebody clicks on one of those ads, she gets paid. Well, what I'm trying to say is that I think in a way we adults have more influence than we realize. I mean, if you read the Bible and study the Bible and talk about the Bible and have information about the Bible and you have books that help you understand the Bible, don't you think your friends know that? And your children know that? And your grandchildren know that? And great-grandchildren? And so maybe we need to do more as church members and as Christians to extend our influence instead of just giving a greeting card to our relatives and children and grandchildren, or giving a nice little Bible, even a Bible. Let's give them the example of a person who's learning and encouraging. My neighbor, who's in the hospital now with a broken hip and a broken arm, is a big fan of a man in Houston who has a Bible study ministry. He's a lawyer by trade, but on the side he has this tremendous Bible study ministry. He's written a lot of books. And she gives his books to people whom she wants to see get involved in serious Bible study. Well, it seems to me that's a great idea. So let's talk about serious Bible study. Now, I think every one of us ought to have a little bit of help besides the Bible. Of course, you have your Sunday school literature, which is really not much. I mean, how long has it been since you looked at the Sunday school book that you studied a year ago? It's not made for that, really, so probably you haven't done that. And our denominations today do not do very much with Bible study. Southern Baptists have missed the ball. They've just fumbled the ball on Bible study. They have one of the poorest Bible study programs of all time. In spite of the fact that there were years when they had the best of all time. There were days when other denominations copied Southern Baptist pattern of Bible study. I don't know that any of them are doing that now. So we're going to have to take the bull by the horns and develop personal Bible study and Bible study for our church that is really, really effective. So I mentioned before, I hope that every one of you, and you'll encourage this for your whole church, everyone should have a good Bible handbook. Now, one of the best, of course, is that Haley's Bible Handbook that I mentioned. And I've listed it here in this section as available on the internet. I have mine over here in the box. I'll get it in a minute, and I've shown it to you before. But Haley's Bible Handbook has been around for about 100 years. Of course, now Dr. Haley has been dead for many years. He himself was a great student of the Bible. He could quote the Bible hour after hour after hour. And so through the years, he had people help him edit it, and they keep bringing in new revisions. But essentially, the one they print, the last one they printed, is not any better than the one that was 25 years old. Because what's happening with Haley's Bible Handbook is the same thing that happens to college textbooks. The publisher updates it every year without really making any changes. He just, maybe adds a picture or two or an article or whatever. He changes the cover or whatever, but essentially it's not a major revision by any means. It's just a different edition because that makes it new. And people like to buy new books instead of old books. Most people think if a book is old, it's not any good. Well, that's a fallacy, of course. And the Bible itself is old. Why do we keep having new editions of the Bible? Because publishers are in the business of making money by selling Bibles. And there's nothing wrong with that. But my point is that we ought to take advantage of that. So if you go right now on the internet, and I've got 2 or 3 sources listed in here in the book, and use bookstore like Thrift Books, thrift.com, thriftbooks.com, or Amazon, or any other, many of them, or even on eBay for that matter. And you look up Haley's Bible Handbook, you will find about 800 to 1,000 editions. And they're old or new. And some of them are keyed to the New International Version. If you use the New International Version, then get that. Otherwise, just get whichever one you want. Buy the best one you can, whatever you can afford. $4.95 plus postage, and the postage is usually about $2 or $3. By the way, folks, postage has really gone up. I went yesterday to mail this book. I went to mail this book to a Jehovah's Witness friend of mine that I've known for a long time. And the last one I mailed was last fall. And the postage now for this book, $4.63. That's media mail. That's the cheapest way. Now, media mail is the post office term for books, or written material, music, and also computer stuff like a CD. Of course, if this is smaller, you can mail it first class, and it would be pretty cheap. But if it's more than a quarter-inch thick, you have to mail it some other way. And media mail is the cheapest way. But you cannot put a note or a letter in media mail. Wow. The only thing you can put in the package is something that is a reference to the book, an invoice or a page that might be an addendum that corrects something. You know, you've got books that have an addendum. And on mine, you see, I have this little advertising here that I've included with it just so people will know about my other books and hope that they will read them or buy them for somebody else. But I can't even put that in this book. I mean, I could. That one of the mailmen told me one time, no, just go ahead and do it. In other words, he was telling me to break the law. But I'm not inclined to do that. My point is that books are very expensive, and just from the standpoint of postage. But these people who are in the business, the bookstores, and they have special ways of getting around the post office somehow. And so sometimes you can buy books for $1.99 postage, but at least it won't be all that much. And of course, the more you buy, the cheaper the postage. So my point is that you should have a good one. I'm not sure if I gave mine away or not. I'd like to give it away, and I'll open my box in a minute and get it out if it's still there. There's a very good handbook by Erdman, and I've been looking over it recently, and I like it. And I think not quite as good not as comprehensive as Haley's Bible Handbook, but it's good. Now Broadman has a very good one. Broadman Bible Handbook and Broadman Dictionary. I used to have both of those, and they're very good. But here's my point. You go to the library right down the street. They have this beautiful library. And you go to the library and you want to look up anything about the Bible. A commentary or a book of history or anything about the Bible. Obviously, you have to know whether or not you can trust that book. You see, not like listening to your pastor, you can trust him. And the men who come here to preach, of course, you're the one who decides whether they're accurate or not in their interpretation, and then the facts are what they present as facts. Every one of us must take that responsibility. We can't evade it. But on the other hand, we obviously are going to trust the people who preach in our church and who teach in our church, just like I'm assuming that all of you trust me. But when you go to the library or you go to the bookstore to buy a book, obviously you're on a different, you're out in a different place. You've got to wonder about the author, and of course that involves the publisher as well. And I told somebody the other day, to me the biggest single advantage that I have, I think, from my education is that I've learned the best sources. You know, I feel sorry for pastors who haven't had formal training like your pastor and I have had, because sometimes they really don't know where to get the best help, particularly when it comes to material about the Bible, or material about the denomination, or Christian history, and so forth. But here's, let me, after I've said that, let me say this. It's not likely that you're going to buy a book that's going to send you to hell, or destroy your Christian life. I mean, all of you are sensible enough that you can recognize error when you see it, particularly if you pay attention to the publishers. You're not going to go to any site on the internet or any bookstore where you buy a book and buy something from a source that you know is antithetical to your own Baptist Christian perspective. So one of the things I do, of course, I know a lot of those sources. I've used hundreds of them in recent years. So when I look on the internet and I see anything, I go back to the source. And some of them I know well, and then others I suspect, and I just do some investigation. But there is so much good material, but whether we use it or not, it remains to be seen. But I do want to point out some things that will be helpful to you. And when you think about it, folks, that's wonderful. The idea that all this material is available to us out there relatively inexpensively, or actually absolutely free. So look on page 62. Helpful Internet Resources for Bible Study, a word of caution. Now, I want all of you to read with me this first line. Read it just like you do on Sunday morning when we're doing the responsive reading. Repeat after me. Not everything on the World Wide Web is true, useful, or required reading. Now, that statement is especially applicable when you think of resources for studying the Bible. And I could have added to that, not everything that you hear on your phone. I don't care who it is who sends you a message on your phone, you need to question it. And I know there's so much false information, what President Trump is fond of calling fake news. There's so much of that out there when it comes to the Bible as well. Just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true, and just because you read it or heard it on your phone, even from somebody that you know. But I don't want you to be worried about it. I just want you to be vigilant. And of course, another thing that I feel sorry for people who haven't had the opportunity to go to a good school that has a good library, is that if you know how to use the library, you're ahead of the game. My greatest disappointment, I taught at Wayland Baptist University 9 years. And I loved every class and every student and every course. But our campus at Wayland, of course they had 2 or 3 locations, but the campus at Wayland has never had a library. They have a bookstore where the students can buy stuff, but they didn't have a library. So I couldn't assign any kind of work that required the students to go to the library. What we do have in this whole area, there's a library consortium. And if you are a student in any school in San Antonio or New Braunfels, any university or even high school, you actually have access to every academic library in South Texas. Unfortunately, at the time I was teaching, the New Braunfels Library did not belong to that system, and I was disappointed about that. But I could have gone to other universities in town and used their library. Well, and you don't have access to all those libraries, and you don't have the time or the energy to go to all those libraries. But the internet, it offers more than you can imagine and more than you can ever use. but we do need to be careful. Now, I mentioned on page 62 at the bottom, there's a site here, you get your account, it won't cost anything, you don't have to give me your credit card, you just have to give them an email of some kind, and you can have an account and you can actually check out books, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books about everything, beekeeping or how to rent a house or how to become a millionaire in 30 days or anything you want. So you might want to look into that. Now, I mentioned also, in addition to having a Bible handbook, that you should have either a book or a study Bible that has an introduction to every book in the Bible. And those of you who studied with us last spring, I gave every one of you that little book. Pastor, you remember those. And I've given away all I have. And if I ever run across the board, I may just buy some with it. Not very expensive. Those are good little books to have to give to people. Yeah, hold that one up, brother. Yeah, there it is. Knowing your Bible. And that's not necessarily the best one, but it's a good one. And all of you, be sure your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren have a copy of that. And you question them about it. You give it to them and tell them to read it, and then sometime when you're eating turkey or whatever you're doing, watching the ball game or whatever, you just ask them if they read that book. That is absolutely essential for understanding the Bible quickly, see? And sometime your church might consider putting together a little packet, about 3 books, that you can give to new members or to visitors or to special people who come or to prospects that you meet out in the community, and that would be one of the books that you could put in there. And so I've got some references to that. And look on page 63, the third item, a list with explanations and photographs of places that are mentioned in the Bible. Now, this is a place you don't have to worry about doctrine, see. They're not going to mislead you. They don't care what they believe about baptism of the Lord's Supper or grace or salvation from sin. If you want to know what Bethel looks like, where Jacob had his encounter with God and lay down and the angel came and touched him, if you want to know what that place looks like, look there in that article. And you'll find it. If you want to know what Jerusalem looked like in the time of Jesus, or what Jericho looked like, or what Mount Carmel looked like, or any of those places mentioned in the Bible, that's a good place, you see. Better than National Geographic. By the way, National Geographic and the History Channel, those two, of course, National Geographic is also on the History Channel. They have some beautiful pictures. That's as far as I will go with them. I don't give the National Geographic or the History Channel any credibility when it comes to interpreting the Bible. I think you'll find them to be very liberal and even flat out wrong sometimes on their analysis of what the Bible means. But you get a lot of encouragement about the Bible from the pictures. God made the pictures, not the commentary. Then there's the chronology of the New Testament. I've run across this book since I've been teaching this class, and it's published by Zondervan. And I know Zondervan is one of the real strong evangelical publishers, been in business for 80 years at least, and I personally met one of the Zondervan brothers. I think there were 3 way back there 70 years ago. But this is a good little book. It's interesting. I keep it out near my breakfast table, and a lot of times since I eat by myself, I look through it, and a lot of charts, and very simple and very large. And but here we have it on the internet. The chronology of the New Testament. And there are 2 different sites at least. And an outline of chronology of Paul's life. That would be interesting. And at the bottom, this material in the book of Revelation. Now, on the next page, Bible translations with help. There's a source called the Bible Hub. And again, their focus is not on interpreting the Bible, but explaining the text. And so you can see many, I've said here, over 20 different versions of the Bible on this site, if you want to compare. And I found that one of the best ways to understand a word or an expression in the Bible is to compare that translation in that word in different translations. That's the value of a parallel Bible, where you have King James, New International Version, Revised Standard Version, today's English version, all 4 columns, or ever how many you're dealing with. But of course, in this case, you can do it more readily. And you can do it without owning the book. You can read the English Standard Version. It's not very well known. I don't use it regularly myself. But you can have it and actually install it on your computer or your tablet or your smartphone. Now, I have a Bible. I have 2 Bibles on my phone, but I rarely use them because the printing is so small. But occasionally I get stuck in the doctor's office or something where I'm waiting, and it's nice to open it up and read it. I don't read it at home because I have my real Bibles, and then I also have the internet. I have so many, all of my computer stuff. You can read the New Testament in Greek, and there are 2 editions of Greek. The Nestle text, by the way, folks, is the standard Greek text, and that's the one I had for years. I don't even have a copy of the Nestle text anymore, but and then the other one is the SBL text that was produced by the Society for Biblical Literature. And either one or both of those, probably the second one, is what the translators use when they're translating the Bible into new languages in Africa or Asia or Latin America. Almost every translator will be using one of these editions of the Greek New Testament. Then there's an excellent article here about how to choose a Bible in terms of comparing the different translations. Those of you who might be writing an article for publication, down at the bottom there's an article there. I check with that before I publish one of my books, because I want to be sure that I'm following the academic guidelines for writing. And at the bottom of the page, of course, is the note about Haley's Bible Handbook. Now look on the next page. These are my personal recommendations. I only listed a few on purpose for many reasons. One is that you don't need a whole bunch, and the other is I don't know very many. And I'm sure there are newer books and there may be better books, but for all practical purposes, these are as good as you can have. And of course, the first one is Haley's Bible Handbook, and then Books of the Bible Made Easy, published by Rose Publishers. Now, let me tell you about Rose. I want all of you to look at this book here because it's an example of the quality that Rose has. I started using Rose material about 40 years ago when they started out with some charts that were laminated and color charts, and here's one. You can see this chart here, and it's thick print and a lot of color. But they used to have these little charts, church history in the Old Testament and on and on, and I began to use some of those. Then they got into some interpretation, and they even had a series one time on comparing different religions. I wasn't as pleased with that series because that was the business I was in, helping people understand different religions. And I was 35 years in that role. But I've been recently, about 20 years ago, Rose turned around, and now it's owned by It's connected with two publishers, and well, can you? I'll think of the name in a minute. Hendrickson, and it has some connection with Tyndall House, both of which are very trustworthy, substantial evangelical publishers. They have a lot going on. Now, if you got on their mailing list, on the email mailing list, you would get an email from them about once a week. They're not hard sell. They're not going to bug you. I won't call you on the phone or give your name to somebody else, or you don't have to give them a credit card or anything like that. It's not a scam. It's not a business high pressure kind of thing. They're really in the business of helping people understand the Bible in color. I mean, let's face it, folks, the Bible is not just black and white. It's real, it's alive. And so pictures and facts and information that is interesting and attractive and pretty, that helps us. Let's take advantage of it. And if you get on their mailing list, about once a week they'll send you an opportunity to download a free piece of Bible information. It's usually the first few pages of something that they're selling. It may be a chart, it may be a list of names, it may be a list of places, it may be an explanation of the difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees, it may be a list of the 12 apostles, on and on. And every week it's something different. But it's free and it's in color. So that if you're teaching Sunday school and you want to make copies for people, you can do that rather. And so what I've done is just every week I copy those. I download that free material and I've got a long list. And if I ever teaching again, especially on any kind of situation, I have access to that kind of material. Rose Publishing. At the bottom of the page, you see also an Ultimate Bible Guide, a complete walkthrough of all the 66 books of the Bible by Broadman Press. Of course, that's the Southern Baptist Convention Press, owned by the Lifeway Christian Resources, which for many years was called the Sunday School Board, and Holman Bible Publishers. By the way, let me interrupt myself here to say, I don't remember the time frame, but this would be back in the 60s probably. The Holman Bible Company used to be a Bible publisher. And way back there, about the 60s, the Southern Baptist Convention, through the Sunday School Board, bought that company. And they went into the Bible publishing business, and then later they changed their name from Broadman Press to Broadman Holman Publishers. And they did that to be less identified with the Baptists and more identified with the audience for other denominations and even people who are not religious. And I wasn't necessarily in favor of that aspect of it, but at least I'm glad they got in the Bible business. So Broadman Holman and then Holman Bible, and then eventually they got their own translation of the Bible, which is called, Pastor helped me, Christian, I've listed it here somewhere, and I quoted from it. I don't really care for it that much, and I don't have a copy of the Bible, except I have it on the internet, and I have it on a disc. Christian Standard Bible, I believe maybe that's the name of it. But anyway, that's an example of a publisher you can trust, you see. If it's Holman Bible Publishers or Broadman Holman Publishers, Convention Press, or Broadman Press, then you can recognize as one of your Baptist friends. Now, here's my favorite book of all time. And I recommend that you get it. I said this last year when we were dealing with the Old Testament. It's a book called The Old Testament Story by John H. Tulloch. Now, Dr. Tulloch has been dead about 15 years. I wish I'd known him. He was a Baptist professor in Nashville at a college that's owned by the Tennessee Baptist Convention. He taught there for 40 years. And he wrote this book as a textbook for Old Testament studies. Now, I've said in those of you that studied and have my little guide on the Old Testament, outlines of Old Testament history, may go back and find my reference to this book. I think I have here the 4th edition. It's in about, up to about 18th edition now. But don't worry about it. The reason it keeps being printed every year or two is because colleges who recommend textbooks will not use an old book. And so the 19th edition or the 18th edition sounds like it's right up to date. It's not any different in substance than the first one. But it's not like they found something, it's not like, they're not really finding very much new about the Bible, folks. They find some manuscripts, like the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. But a commentary about Paul's letter to the Ephesians that was written 50 years ago is just as good today as it was then. But the main difference is that the illustrations were, different. Trust me, I've read a lot of commentaries, and the old ones sometimes are better than the new ones. But if you're selling college textbooks, you can't sell a book that's 10 years old. So here's what I recommend: go online, look up this book, and buy the best one you can buy. If it's 4th edition, 5th edition, 6th edition, it won't matter. And they even have it in paperback, but they're so cheap. You go ahead and buy it in hardback. And this one was like $4.95 plus postage. You can't beat that, And today, if you bought this book, it'd be $39.95 plus postage. That's what the students are paying for it now. We only used this book 1 year while I was teaching at Wayland. The first year, and at Wayland, the textbooks are chosen by the faculty at Plainview, where Wayland Baptist University is located, and then they have like 15 or 16 satellite campuses, and those of us who taught here in San Antonio did not have any input into what textbook we had to use. But first year that I taught, they told me to use this textbook, and I started using it. And two things I discovered right off. First of all, it's a beautiful book, a wonderful book. It's if you read this book, you don't need a commentary, really. If you read this book to understand the Old Testament, it's wonderful. It's easy to read, and it's well done, and it's organized, and a lot of facts, and it's just a wonderful book. But the other thing about it is, it's more than any human being could ever learn in a course. I mean, it would take, if I were using this as a textbook in a course, I would at least want 3 or 4 courses. I mean, you can't do it in 11 weeks. You just can't do it. And I found that my students didn't like it at all, and that was the reason. It's just too much material. And so I finally ended up writing my own textbook, and I was able to say to the students here the very first day, if it's in my book, you are to know it. And I gave them a list of Old Testament material to read. I didn't require them to read the whole Old Testament, but I knew they wouldn't do it. If you're working in San Antonio, or you're in the fire department, or you're in the Air Force, as many of my students were, or you're a mother with 3 children at home and you're going to school at night, and you're working on a degree, and you're taking 3 university courses, and you have Old Testament history, you're not going to read the whole Old Testament while you're in my class. And you're not going to read this textbook and know what it says. But if you read my guidebook, which is you just have about 2 pages a day, then it's easier. And I found that worked out better. I'm not saying my guidebook is better. For my purposes, it was good. But I really like Dr. Tulloch. After Dr. Tulloch died, the publisher enlisted another man to edit the book, and so his name is on it now. But it's such a beautiful book, and I like it, and I like the dating and so forth. Okay. And then I must mention one other thing, and that is come back to one other thing, and that is if you are computer oriented, if you are computer oriented and you like to read online, either tablet or computer or even phone, then consider a Bible-based program. And I mentioned last week, the best one, in my view, is the Power Bible. In addition to that, there's the Online Bible, both of which have a lot of different translations and excellent search features, and you put one or two or three or four on your screen and compare them. I find that very helpful. And then the New English translation is very good, and I'll be glad to give you one of these. I just have two with me, but this is free to use. You can't copy it and sell it, but you can copy it and give it away. Now, I've taken more time than I intended to, but I'm a great fan of helping people discover what works for them, you see. And again, I know that some of you don't, my brother, if you say computer to him, he'll throw you out of his house. But he is learning to use the phone, you know. And yet when he was in his career for 40 years with Gulf and Chevron, he was the top man in their process. And if you wanted a job at Chevron, he was the one that told you how to do it. I mean, he was in personnel all those years. But he's not a computer person. And you may not be either, but in the last few years I've come to appreciate how it helps them understand the Bible. But nothing beats opening up a piece of a version of the Bible, an edition of the Bible that you like. That you know, it's like when you go to the closet and get something to wear to church, you wear what you have, but you also tend to wear what you like. You know, that's why you see you come to church and my clothes are kind of worn out. Well, that's my favorite shirt or my favorite, you know. What question do you have about any book or any resource that can help you understand the Bible?
I've discovered on the internet, I go to a site called Discover Revelation, and it breaks down, the author, Ken Casey, he breaks down the books of the Bible. He does introduction to the books of the Bible, and you can actually download it to your computer if you want, like I've done.
Yeah.
But it's a good resource. It has helped me.
Yeah, and what is that?
It's called Discover Revelation.
Discover Revelation. By who do you remember?
Ken Casey, but he doesn't like to publicize his
Yeah.
name.
Yeah.
Because he does it all the way from Genesis to Revelation, and he breaks it down to where.
Does he have material on other books of the Bible too?
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
It's not just Revelation, but he started off.
Well, you're on to something, because let's face it, we've all noticed that different teachers and different preachers have different styles.
Right.
And so when you find a book or an interpreter a teacher, and you are on the same wavelength, then obviously that helps to study. That's also, by the way, folks, no matter how good a teacher you are or how good a preacher you are, like your pastor, there's some people that just don't tune in because they don't think that way, or they don't follow the reasoning you have, or the vocabulary you use, or the style that you have. And I think that particularly when it comes to the Bible, and particularly when it comes to interpreting some of the more difficult and more basic passages like Revelation and the book of Hebrews that we ought to compare instead of repeating just on one source. That's why I like the study Bible, but I kind of shy away from the study Bibles that are by one person, because obviously one person doesn't have this scope that a group will have. But what works is helpful. Yeah, that's it. I remember that Jesus told a story about the parable. A man sowed his field with grain. And some enemy, a neighbor perhaps, who was unhappy about something, came and sowed what Jesus called tares. It's an old English word, means weeds. And in Texas, we're familiar with lots of weeds, lots of birds and all. And so he was so frustrated because all these tares were growing in his wheat. And Jesus said, on the day of harvest, that the harvesters would separate the wheat from the tares.
Yes.
Now, there's a lot in that parable. But part of what's in that parable is that there's judgment. And God's in charge of the judgment. And I think that's the main point. But along the way, I think we can remember that whatever is good gives the devil an opportunity to use it for bad.
Yes.
You see? And the best example of that I know is the internet. I mean, your pastor and I lived for many, many years and preached for many, many years without the internet. You know? I don't know what these young preachers think. They don't know that. When I started teaching at Wayland in 1997, I retired. I moved out here in Ronald. I've been in Ronald 30 years last August. And, but then I had the opportunity to teach at Fort Washington School of Theology and Howard Payne University down in Corpus Christi. And so I taught there for 2 years, and they were very pleased with my work, and I enjoyed that as much as anything I've ever done. But it was hard to drive down there and back every week. But then, lo and behold, the folks at Wayland called me and asked me to come and teach for them, because I was the only man around here that had a background in church history and in world religions and religions in America. So the main thing they got me for was to teach my material on world religions and religions in America. And I was glad to do that. But along the way, since they require all of their students to take Old Testament history and New Testament history, they always need Bible teachers. So obviously, almost all of us who were teaching religious courses also taught Old Testament history. And I chose that to stay with them. But anyway, in the meantime, I realized that for the first time, I've been teaching, I've taught 4 seminaries in 3 universities, but this was the very first time that the students in my class had the internet. And some of them had their laptops in class, and I didn't let them use the laptop except in the course of religions in America. They need to do without it in class. But anyway, I realized that here was something new. And then I began to realize that the biggest problem with the students was, first of all, they wasted a lot of time, and the other was that they believed whatever they read on the internet. And when it comes to the Bible, that's kind of dangerous. You know, not everybody that has an article on the internet is trustworthy. But anyway, and I didn't have time to stop and teach them how to use the internet. They didn't even have a course in the university in those days on that. I hope they do now. So my point is that There's so much out there that gives us the opportunity to study the Bible. Let's don't miss it. Let's don't let our family miss it. Let's don't let our friends miss it. Let us be continuing to hide the Word of God in our heart, not just once and for all, but daily, you know. And I hope you have a Bible reading plan that works for you. I mentioned my sister, I mentioned my brother. When my brother was about 12, the Texas Baptist had a program through the church training department. And of course, we were all involved in those days in training union. Church, and then later they changed the name to church training. But we were all involved, and the training union had a program called sword drill. And we used a little text Bible like we have in the church auditorium in the pew Bibles, hardback, a little thick book. And you learned a list of scriptures. You learned where they were, but you also learned to quote them. But you learned how to find passages in the Bible, and you did it in a competition kind of thing. So that, for those of you who remember that, and some of you don't, the young people would stand up, and he was 12 years old. And he went all the way to the state finals.
Wow.
And I don't remember how he came out, but there were children from all over Texas, and I don't know whether it was in Austin or someplace. We lived in Houston. But he went all the way to the state finals. He went to this, in Houston, and, you know, was in the top 3 or 4, and then he went up, and I don't know how he placed, but he could open the Bible, and the moderator would call out a verse, and then they would find it. He could find any place in the Bible in 4 seconds.
Wow.
5 seconds was the norm. And then in addition to that, we had daily Bible reading. And it was a long passage, not as short as our Bible study passage on Sunday for Sunday school, but a little bit longer. And since I was just a little boy, until I went to Africa for that matter, I followed those readings every day. And I've been so grateful. It enriched my life, and now, of course, I have the discipline, and I don't have to have somebody to give me the list, and I change mine up. I try to be studying one book in the Bible all the time, and then, because of my study, I'm jumping around studying different things at the same time. But I believe we ought to help our people develop a personal Bible study program that really works, and it ought to be. It said that the major thing in it should be reading the text of the Bible. I have a wonderful friend. She is one of the most beautiful women, older lady, but for years she has read devotional books about the Bible, and that's her plan. And I'm not going to change her. I'm not going to criticize her. But the irony is she doesn't know much about the Bible, but she knows a lot about the devotional part. Well, if you're not careful, you can fool yourself at thinking that you know a lot about the Bible because you read somebody's commentary every day. No. Your pastor wants you to read the Bible, not just to listen to him. If all you hear about the Bible and what he says in 30 minutes on Sunday morning, you are an invalid. And you think about the people who come to our church, and if it weren't for the deacon reading the Bible and the pastor preaching, they wouldn't know anything about the Bible. There's so much for us to learn. And I'm glad that God's not going to give us a test when we get to heaven. My students, I've got to stop. My students used to say, Professor Smith, is this going to be on the test? Well, when you get to heaven, whoever meets you at the gate, I don't know. If he asked me, how much do you know about the Bible? I must go on. And the best I would be able to say is, well, I no better than Brother Tom. Let's stand together. Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to come together to study the Bible. And help us to realize that the learning about the Bible, learning to treasure it, learning to be familiar with it, learning how to read it, learning how to explain it, is a part of the whole matter of knowing what it says. Help us to realize that the Bible has you for its author, and truth without any mixture of error for its matter. Thank you for your word. Thank you that you guarded it through the years, watched over it, blessed its translation, and have brought it to us so that every one of us has the opportunity to read it in many forms, in many editions, in many settings. And in spite of all of that, forgive us if we've neglected your word. Hide it, let us hide it in our hearts, that you may live in our hearts, and we may demonstrate you to others every day. Bless those for whom we're praying. Bless our nation in these critical times. And bless our church as we gather on Sunday for worship and praise and outreach. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.